Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. And today we are going to be doing our top 10 list for the Latin America International Championships. Jack's with me to run down what we think are the current best decks in the standard format.
So, kicking us off, we do indeed have Zoroark, which is one of our personal favourites, or Joe's in particular. As you can see, just a quick rundown of what we've got on the slides, just before we get fully into this. We've got total placements and total CP earned. This takes into account pretty much almost all of the events since Ultra Prism's release. We've made some adjustments based on sort of the size of the events and stuff, just so it doesn't sort of skew the results to say random decks that won really small events are going to be more successful. This is kind of based on the overall player base as well. But you'll see that we've got, like I say, the total placements, the total CP earned, some good matchups, some bad matchups, and a kind of tech consideration you could have if you decide to play this deck. So yeah, onto Zoroark itself. It's actually one of the... I feel like it's getting a little bit more respect now, Zoroark as a Zoroark variant. I think a lot of people began seeing it as a meme and are now sort of respecting the archetype. It can hold its own against some Zoroark variants, but can also struggle against others. But in general, just having ways to access Ability Lock as a Zoroark deck is really, really strong. Some good matchups, things like Espeon Garb can be good, and also Vikavolt Tapu Bulu. We've kind of tried to keep the good and bad matchups based on the top 10 as well, as a brief side note, but sometimes there'll be some sort of things that aren't quite in the top 10, but still are matchups worth considering. Speaking of such, Duskmane, Necrozma, or Turbo Metals, as we've sort of lumped it all together as, can be a bit of a bad matchup. Same with Zoropod. In general, I think the inherent strengths of the deck are being able to Ability Lock as a Zoroark deck. We've seen in Expanded being able to play Hex after you've done a load of trading as Zoroark, as a Zoroark deck is really, really strong. And whilst it's not quite as strong as Hex, because it's based on having a tool attached to your Garb, and they can blow off the tool and things like that. You can kind of translate the concept somewhat to standard, and it is still really, really strong. Abilities are still incredibly strong in the game right now. So it's useful to be able to abuse your own Zoroarks and then force your opponent to have to find resources before they're able to trade and stuff, to sort of slow them down as well. A tech consideration could be Necrozma. Black-Ray GX is a huge GX attack to be able to set up the bench really, really well. In general, a lot of Zoroark variants, or most Zoroark variants, are able to use some kind of GX attack, but Zoroark doesn't really have a particularly good GX attack. So, considering Necrozma is completely colorless, it's really, really good to be able to Black-Ray multiple Zoroarks even in a lot of cases, to set them up to be able to knock them out with only one hit from Zoroarks later on, using Writer's Beating. They can't Ace a Roller and Max Potion and heal all of their Zoroarks in one turn. So as long as you're able to get away with playing Black-Ray, you should be able to benefit in the turns afterwards by being able to take one shots rather than two shots and win races that way as well. So that, combined with being able to lock down things like trade and stuff, like I say, to force your opponent to have the resource in hand before they can draw into them, can be a really, really lethal combo.
Yeah, I'm definitely a fan of this archetype. I like that you have high Bridget count and oftentimes like multiple Evo Soda alongside your Garbodors, so you do have really high odds of getting that turn 2 Garbatoxin, and if you're the one going first against opposing Zoroarks, that already gives you like a really good advantage. It can really ruin their like turn 2 plays, seeing as though pretty much every Zoroark deck just Bridgets on one, so they need to already have like nice supporters in hand alongside their Bridget. They also need to have access to double colorless, where they're oftentimes only playing 4 copies, and sometimes from like Cynthias and stuff they can whiff alongside whiffing Zoroarks and stuff like that. So it puts pressure on the opponent very early on in the game. I think one of the downsides of the deck is that Parallel City is everywhere right now, not only in Zoroark builds, but also Espeon Garb sometimes plays it, and a few other decks are just choosing to play Parallel because people have seen how powerful it is, and it's also like a semi-tech for Zoroark in general. And this deck is one of the ones that gets hurt most because you want to have Ability Lock, you want to still have multiple Zoroarks, and you want to leave a space open for a Trubbish to eventually become a Trash Avalanche. So there are benefits to this archetype. You do pair Zoroark, which is fighting weak with a Psychic-type attacker in Trashalanche, which we know is very powerful, so there's some good synergy there to help defend against the Buzzwoles of the world. And also, now that Espeon Garb is sort of back on the radar, that's, again, a even better weakness to hit right now. So there's a lot going for Zoroark. It's sort of under the radar a little bit right now, and that's why it's only placed on our number 10 slot, just because I feel like there's not been enough people piloting and wrapping the deck to give it many more CP placements, but having tested it a lot, I am a big fan. So let's move on to Sylveon, the main milling variant currently in our format. It's been getting a shrewd amount of CP, to be honest. It's getting some high conversion rates, 7 placements in the last few tournaments over the couple of months since the latest set has come out. And you can see why. Its positive matchups mainly revolve around Zoroark variants, because they are decks that play sometimes 7-8 energy total. And when you're playing a mill-style variant, which has resistance to Zoroark as well, it's very difficult if they can ever take one-hit KOs on the Sylveon, especially with parallels and muscle dumbbells. You're simply able to run them out of resources. So having a favourable to Zoroark is a very, very good thing, as you can see there. And for the bad matchups, really they're not really fringe decks, but they're not the ones that you'll think will be like 20% of the field. They're more likely going to be like 5% of the field, and that's things like the Ho-Oh Volcanion archetype and also Vika Bulu, which is maybe a little bit more popular and prevalent, but still something that you'd face maybe like twice in a tournament tops. And that's why we're seeing Sylveon get into that top 32 placement quite consistently, even though it's not really gone all the way to a win just yet. It's still getting good placements. In our books, a nice tech is Professor Kukui, because you can use Lucamine to recycle this card, and it's going to be fantastic for you to hit over 110, especially because people are teching in the Oranguru from Ultra Prism so that you can recycle your own stuff. Well, now you have a one-shot answer to this guy, which can really reduce the amount of resource management they can do, and it can put them in an awkward prize race situation as well at times, because you can eventually just keep swinging with the Sylveon once you've got them out of energy. They end up having to like puzzle back Oranguru pieces a lot of the time, and you can just out-resource them even with their Guru, because you can be Kukuing and one-shotting them a lot more consistently. So you're missing less magical ribbons, and you're accelerating the board state, and you're dealing with the Guru one turn quicker. So really nice tech for Guru, which is basically everyone's sort of like one card answer to this deck right now. That's the main reason why it's not higher on the list. People are teching Guru in many situations, but the Kukui can make it a little less difficult for you.
Yeah, definitely. The Kukui is a really, really nice tech. And I think given that a lot of people just wrote off milling archetypes, especially Sylveon, because it's it's a lot less aggressive than some of the others. They kind of wrote them off as soon as Ultra Prism was released because of resource management Oranguru. But I think the fact that it's still on our top 10 shows that people that don't respect Mill and don't respect Sylveon, that aren't playing resource management Oranguru, can still be punished. And even with techs like Kukui, you can still get around it. So I think it just shows that Sylveon can still survive its own, even though there's probably less Zoroarks overall now, and we're looking more at a Buzzwole-based meta than we were when Sylveon was at its peak. I still think it can hold its own and could be a nice deck to guarantee you a good shot at top 32, but maybe not take you all the way to the finals. If you're just looking to secure top 32, this could be one of those kind of picks. Next up, we have Vika Bulu, a deck that always pretty much has been in the format for about a year now, and has always found its way back into the meta. Good matchups. Sylveon is a really, really good matchup. They honestly really struggle to sort of find a way to be able to out resource you of your energy before you're able to take knockouts on them. There are some tricks Sylveon can do, but in general, it's definitely in Tapu Bulu's favour. And similarly with Greninja, you can apply so much pressure just with things like Horn Attack that you can never really let Greninja into the game. If Greninja does get into the game, it's like any other ninja deck. It probably will win, but you can apply so much pressure, you make it really, really difficult for them to actually get into the game anyway. However, Zoroark is seeing a little bit more play. I feel like it's getting a little bit more popular again, and anything with Gardevoir is naturally going to be a pretty bad matchup because Bulu really, really struggles to one-shot Gardevoir. A lot of the sort of techs that people were playing have been dropped in favour of consistency cards, meaning that they can't really hit 230 very consistently anymore. A lot of the time it'll have to be through a Tapu Koko spread first, which is a little bit awkward. A lot of them aren't playing things like Kukui anymore, so that means Gardevoir can often take a hit and deal with potentially two Bulus in one as one Pokemon, which is really, really strong. In general, you can be pretty favored against a lot of these Pokemon that have 210 HP, because 210 is not a number you're scared of hitting at all. But I think Zoroark is definitely one of the hardest matchups. Similarly, Espeon Guard can be pretty hard. The Divide can be pretty crucial in the early turns, locking you out of the game, stopping you from setting up two Tapu Bulus, Vikavots a lot of the time. Then they can lock your abilities, meaning that you have to find your Field Blowers. A lot of cases you're going to be running 2 to 3 Field Blower anyway, but if you can't find them, all of a sudden your Bulu's not really doing very much. They can confuse the Bulu as well, which is also really, really annoying, because they're sort of poking you, so they're not committing much themselves, whereas you still have to discard the energy, and you have to now flip for it to get the attack through as well. So in general, it can be a pretty awkward matchup. One tech that could be nice for that is Mew. Also helps in the Buzzwole matchups. Letting you copy Tapu Bulu's attacks is really, really nice. Obviously, if they have ability lock, it's less than useful, but in general, it can just be nice pressure in the early turns. And against Buzzwole, like I say, you're also able to hit them for weakness, which just makes that sort of Buzzwole matchup so much nicer. And I think Buzzwole will be a huge deck going into the tournament. It has to be one of the decks you have to consider. You'll play 2 or 3 times in the first day of the tournament at least. So you have to have an answer to that, and I think Mew is the deck's best answer to that a lot of the time, just because you hit them for weakness, and you're a one-prize attacker as well, which is really, really nice.
Yeah, Mew's a bit of a no-brainer at this point. It's hardly even a tech. It's such a powerful card. Free Retreat is often amazing for you. Encounter gets you out of dud hands at times, and it improves not only Buzzrock and other Buzzwole variants, which will be popular, but with Espeon Garb sort of in this precarious spot as well, trying to counter the Buzzwoles, the Mew can come in and do a good job for you as well. So it just makes a lot of sense to play the card. I think other than that, you want to be streamlined, straightforward Bulu, probably playing 3 Field Blowers, but from there, very simple archetype. And we know that just trying to get its own strategy off as frequently as possible is the best way to play this deck. I'm still a fan of the Bridget build, but there'll be people playing all sorts, so do bear that in mind. Next up, we have Lucario variants, the newcomer from the promo box with Lucario. He has impressed so far. He's come in many forms, Lucario. He's been paired with Buzzwole alongside just Elixirs to almost be similar to the Lycanroc Buzzwole build, but you're a little bit easier to get powered up a Lucario than it is to power up the Lycanroc. So you're less reliant on max elixirs in some regard, which is pretty tempting. There's also pairing Lucario with Lycanroc, so now you use things like Super Scoop Ups to try and cycle both the ability to gust Pokemon, Bloodthirsty Eyes, and also to recycle your Lucario's damage output. That's also a pretty cool option that we've seen in tournaments. And of course, there's the build that just says, hey, you know what's every Stage 1's best friend is? It's going to be Zoroark, and that's because you can just draw a bunch of cards and do good stuff, and then your Zoroark deck, which has a fighting element towards it to then help you against mirror matches. So plenty of ways you can play Lucario. He has been impressive, as you can see, with 7 placements, and he's had a lot less time to do it in as well, a lot less tournaments to show up, but he has shown up in many different variations. And when you see a card popping up in many different lists, it is a testament to the power of the card in a vacuum. So it's definitely one that you do have to be aware of. From where I'm standing, I like the simplistic Lucario build, which is mainly a fighting variant with Buzzwole. As I said, you sort of lose out some element of gusting, but you're less reliant on max elixirs hitting every single turn. So instead of playing the Lycanroc, you just play the Lucario. Biggest downside is you're very, very psychic weak, and you have to have answers for that in your own list, but I think it's something that you can manage quite easily. So yeah, that's where I would be leaning towards Lucario, but I can't really question you if you want to play the other builds. I mean, Zoroark's amazing, and so is having the option to Bloodthirsty Eyes the right targets up each turn, because Lucario is such an efficient attacker dealing with Zoroarks, which will be hiding on the bench, and so too will Tapu Leles, which is also fantastic at dealing with. So definitely a powerful archetype. It likes to face the dark stuff more than anything else, and is fearful of facing Garbodor variants, and most of all fearful of the Espeon Garb because it has weakness all over the board really, and shuts down abilities and all the fun stuff you want to do. So lots of awkwardness. Espeon Garb is in and around right now. It did have some nice performances recently in regionals, so it is a slight concern for Lucario, as is the fact that Buzzwole is so hyped going into this deck, into the tournament, that Lucario may struggle and may not be the safest of plays, but I think it could be one that could reward people who are brave enough, in my eyes.
Yeah, definitely. I think it could get caught up in the whirlwind of people trying to deal with Buzzwole, but it also, I think, is a card that a lot less people are testing against and will naturally be thinking about less, so it could surprise people. A nice little tech is Super Scoop Up. Obviously, Lucario's damage is pretty much based on whether it's bounced or evolved during its turn. A lot of the time, people won't hit into you, so they don't lose out to your Cantankerous Beatdown GX, meaning that Acerola isn't able to get Lucario's back into your hand. So Super Scoop Up could be a nice little way of being able to surprise your opponent in that you're still able to increase its damage, and they've sort of wasted a turn of not even attacking you because you've still been able to take a knockout. I think in general, Lucario seems very, very good. It's unfortunate that it does indeed have the same weakness as Buzzwole, but I think it has some of its own strengths, and for a 1-energy attacker is incredibly efficient, so it's definitely one to keep your eyes on. Next up, we do indeed have Espeon Garb. It's actually only had 5 placements. It kind of dropped off the radar for a little bit. Garb variants did. But then, obviously, it came first and second in a US regionals not too long ago. So it had a fantastic showing there. And that's kind of what's put it back on everyone's radar. Obviously, the deck is incredibly good against all of these psychic weak Pokemon right now. Buzzwole and Lucario are the 2 main ones. You're just able to abuse the fact that Buzzwole and Lucario are such strong cards, but are weak to psychic. And Espeon is a pretty efficient attacker against those. You can do 120 for 1 energy and confuse them, forcing them to have to flip during their next turn to attack, which is really, really strong, especially as once you evolved into a 200 HP psychic type, Buzzwole especially really struggles to deal with you in the early turns. They have to Knuckle Impact or Absorption you really, because Jet Punches just aren't doing what the amount of damage that you're doing. You can 2-shot them quite consistently, whereas Jet Punch can sometimes really, really struggle against you, which is nice. Having Ability Lock as well is obviously really good. And another thing is people really don't respect Trash Launch. I feel like still a lot of people don't respect Trash Launch, so people will be chocking their lists full of items and either will be forced to use them and increase your damage output in the late game, or forced not to use them and have an inherent more inconsistent list. So in general, I think Espeon Garb hit at a really good time, and I don't think it's going anywhere for a little while at least. Some more awkward matchups. Zoroark can be pretty awkward. They can do some cute little things and to be able to deal with your Espeon. Obviously, if you're able to kill their routes early, it can be really, really strong for you, and they can struggle to get back into the game. But if they can develop 2 Gardevoirs, they're going to be in a pretty good position. It's a lot to ask from them, but if they're able to get to that board position, it's definitely in their favor. And they also have Twilight GX, meaning that they can trade all their items away all they want in the early turns, just to Twilight them back into the game, meaning that you don't have a strong late game attacker, and you're kind of stuck using Espeon and trying to carry the game through Espeon's confusion and doing things like this, which is a bit more awkward. And Duskmane Necrozma, again, Turbo Metals. It doesn't really use abilities. It will sometimes use Oranguru, sometimes use Mew, sometimes use Octillery. But inherently, the 2 cards on the screen are the 2 cards the deck wants to use. They want to use Duskmane, they want to use Solgaleo Prism, and neither of these cards have an ability. And also, Duskmane one-shots your Espeons really, really nicely. You also have resistance to the whole deck, meaning that in general, it's just not a nice matchup for you at all. They can clean out 4. If they go down prizes first, they can clean out 4 prizes just through 1 Duskmane Necrozma a lot of the time, whilst you're not really hindering them with Garbatoxin at all. So it can definitely be really, really awkward if you end up pairing up against Metals. That in combination with the resistance is really, really big. Parallel Cities, I think, have always been floating in and out of Espeon lists. Even when it was popular back in the day, some people swore by them, some people only played one, some people didn't play any. It was always a card that kind of dropped in and out of play, and I think it's still really, really important in the deck. You're able to limit Zoroark's damage output, which is nice to be able to kind of match the fact that they have resistance on you. You can also reduce their damage output, which obviously isn't as nice as resistance, but in general can be helpful. Plus, it can also cripple their setups as well. And Parallel, just in general, is a really, really strong card. It always has been, and I think it will be until it rotates. So playing at least one, maybe even two copies of Parallel wouldn't go amiss at all, just to try and cripple your opponent's setup and try and get away with doing Espeon things whilst feasting on all of the fighting Pokemon out there as well.
Yeah, I think you have to tread a delicate line when you're building Espeon Garb at the moment. I think Field Blower counts, in my opinion, are going back up to 3. I feel like 3 will be what most Zoroark players will be playing at this IC. So I think you need to strike a good balance between teching for Zoroark whilst being consistent enough, or as consistent as possible. I think throwing in Parallels and E-Hammers will definitely improve your Zoro matchup, but you have to be aware that you are still a Garbodor variant. You do still struggle with clunk issues. So I think the biggest fear for me would be over-teching and just hoping that you hit more Buzzwoles than Zoroarks. Not saying that Zoroark's like an auto loss or anything like that, but it's certainly an awkward matchup. So your techs will need to be in that direction, but do be aware that I think some Zoro players will be upping their Field Blower counts, and that could be a small problem for Espeon Garb players. Next up, we have Zoroark, the deck that took down the last International Championships. You can see it's got still a handy amount of CP earned recently and a decent chunk of placements. It does enjoy facing Vika Bulu because you have the Guardi, which can tank, and things like Gallade can deal with the Vikavolt. Obviously, the Bulus have to discard energy from themselves because they're so worried about getting hit via the Guardi that you can hit them flush at certain points by attacking with a Gallade alongside a Guzma. And when you have trades on your side, especially with Premonition, you can make that happen quite often. So you're definitely the one in favour there, in control of the game. And you're also pretty decent against the fire variants as well, because they need to stack up a bunch of energy to them, and you can normally cash in on that quite nicely, whilst keeping your Zoroark's Knives and Protection on the bench to contain your draw engine for later on. Obviously, you're a bit fearful of metal stuff. They can deal with literally everything quite quickly, and you're a relatively slow Zoroark variant as well, relying on rare candies and stuff like that, so it does give them time to prep their board and build lots of energies, and that's going to be a problem for you. And Buzzrock as well, slightly unfavoured, even though we saw Tord tearing through them at the International Championships. He himself says that it's an awkward matchup, and that's really because of the amount of pressure that Buzz players can put on you early on. They can target Rolts, they can deal with the draw engine head on and hope that you draw poorly. There's different ways they can go about the matchup, but overall I think they will have the edge over you. And that is the biggest concern for me if you're going to be playing Zoroark. There's a lot of reason to play the deck, because I think it does have outs to other Zoroark players. As you can see, our tech is playing a second Gallade for having that extra bit of fighting element in your list to try and take down, you know, semi-mirror matches, whatever Zoroark variant it may be. And also the fact that you have the Twilight, you have means against mill variants, because I think that's also something that's sort of picked up in popularity alongside the popularity of Zoroark. So it does cover a wide range of matchups, I think, this archetype, but it also does struggle against a handful of things, most notably what is likely to be the most popular deck in format. And it's definitely a risk to take this deck, but one that, again, as we saw last time, could pay off.
Yeah, definitely. It feels like this is a Zoroark variant which has pretty good matchups, pretty favourable matchups across the board, apart from some of the more fringe stuff, except for Buzzwole. But it's also a lot slower and a lot clunkier because you're a stage 2 rather than a stage 1, meaning things like Zoroark and Zoropod are going to be inherently more consistent than you. So it feels like you can trade off some good matchups for some consistency. So you've just kind of got to weigh up whether that's what you want to do. In an IC, as we've said, it did really well last time. So maybe the trade-off is worth it. Double Gallade is really, really strong because it means that you have a fighting element, like we say, but it's also a one-prize attacker. Things like Lucario, Zoroark, and Zoroark, Lycanroc, all are 2-prize attackers that they're fighting type. So yes, you're getting kind of a free knockout, but if your opponent responds, you haven't really gone up in tempo at all. Whereas Gallade can push you ahead in tempo and also give you some strong sort of capabilities of drawing exactly what you want for the next couple of turns. So it's a really, really good all-round card. Again, you trade off the fact it's a stage 2 rather than a stage 1. So you've just kind of got to weigh all these things up. I think Zoroark is it's one of my favorite decks to play right now, and it definitely be one I'd consider taking to the tournament. But I think there's still other Zoroark variants that may be slightly favorable, slightly better, I should say, to take. one of which is indeed Zoro Lycanroc, another deck that kind of again dropped off the radar a little bit, especially immediately, but has come back into the light and has always sort of solidified its place in the format as a 50-50 deck. A lot of Zoroark decks are 50-50 decks, unless they're a build that specifically targets a type of deck. And in general, this one likes to see Zoroarks, of course, because you have a fighting element, but also in general, because you have so many gusting effects, you can deal with pretty much anything in the early turns. Riotous Beating is pretty much 120 on turn 2 every game. And if you're able to pair it with a gusting effect as well as something like N for hand disruption or Cynthia to build your own hand backup, things like this, you're going to be able to go ahead in the prize race a lot of the time, as well as take out something crucial on your opponent's board to try and cripple their setup. So that's definitely one real important thing that Zoro Lycanroc can do a lot better than the other Zoroark variants. Obviously, Mill is a bit of an issue. That's why we've got the tech of the basic fighting on here. In general, I think basic fighting can be somewhat better than Oranguru at some points, but still having basic fighting in combination with Oranguru is really, really important, just because it means that you don't have to commit a DCE to an Oranguru to be able to resource management. Also means you can get around some of the more awkward things, like the huge amounts of E-hammers they play. Stuff like that means that you don't fall prey to free discards. One of the big things about Sylveon is if they can get a free discard, they can find another piece of their puzzle to start milling you instead. Whereas if you're attaching energy that they have to flip for or things like that, it's gonna actually be a little bit more difficult for them. And that's one of the ways Zoro Lycanroc can win this matchup. And Buzzgarb is another deck that's never very nice. If the Buzzgarb player is playing a Rainbow build, it's kind of less consistent, so you're not as worried. But if they've just gone pure Buzzwole and Elixirs and then are trying to stop your trades as well, it can actually be really, really difficult for you to set up a board before they've sort of built up 2 Buzzwoles and being able to start taking down your Zoroarks. They also, like I say, stop your trade as well as your Bloodthirsty Eyes, which is huge because it means that if they're able to unlock Garbotoxin before you can take them out with Bloodthirsty Eyes, it's kind of a lot more difficult for you to be able to find your field blowers, to get into your combo, to start dealing with them. You need a lot of pieces of the puzzle before you've even started trading. So it can definitely be really awkward. This has seen more placements and more CP than Zoroark, but I think in general, it's still kind of a risky one. You're also weak to Golisopod, or Lycanroc is weak to Golisopod, meaning that Zoropod matchups are always a little bit more awkward because 2 of your Pokemon, or the way Golisopod works, sort of benefits that Lycanroc sits on the bench anyway. So you're going to really, really struggle to have something to deal with their Zoroarks because your fighting type would have been taken out. So it's just kind of awkward. I think it's still a fine deck, but I think there's definitely some awkward things about Zoro Lycanroc, which would be why I would personally play Zoroark or Zoropod above Lycanroc.
Yeah, I mean, there's the ongoing argument. Some people are team Lycanroc, some people are team Golisopod, but regardless, you're a very powerful Zoroark variant. I can't really hate on anyone playing either. I'm still firmly on camp Golisopod, but I mean, Lycanroc, I think if you choose your techs wisely, I think if you play the Guru, if you play maybe like 2 basic fighting and maybe as high as 2 strong energy in addition to your 4 DCEs, I think it's a pretty good idea because securing that turn 1 Bridget alongside a turn 1 attachment, especially if it's a basic fighting against another Zoroark player, it forces them to Guzma on turn 2, or if you went first, it just means you're safe pretty much. And they can't even enhanced hammer away basic fighting. So that puts you in a really ascendant position. I mean, all the Zoroark decks, not all of them are going to be Golisopod variants, so Lycanroc can have a field day in some cases. Having Bloodthirsty Eyes lets you be very aggressive with your draws and lets you really thin through the deck quite nicely. So it lets you cash in on Mallows and really build up your board state because you know you can fall back on Bloodthirsty Eye. So it's just a really good archetype. I am a fan of it, obviously, and I think I can definitely see it doing quite well because I know there'll be good players piloting it, and we know like a 55 card list, and if you just choose your techs wisely and hit the correct matchups that you're expecting, I think it's going to go well for you. So definitely a powerful archetype that we need to look out for. Following on from that, we have Buzzgarb. This has a ridiculous amount of CP earned and a bunch of placements as well. Definitely raised up in popularity again from coming second place in a US regional. Buzzwole showing off his potency, his power, just by elixiring onto him, sometimes even using Carbink Break to power these guys up, and getting ridiculous one-hit KOs is pretty much the name of the game. All the while, you're relying on Garbodor to slow down mainly Zoroark variants, but also shutting down the likes of Vika Bulus and all those other fancy decks as well. So you can see you like to face Zoroark builds on average. I mean, there are psychic techs that you have to be concerned about. I think since Lucario GX has come into play, more people are moving towards Mew EX rather than Mewtwo from Evolutions. And that bodes well for you because you can turn them off with Garbodor and it forces them to have an extra piece at times, which can be very awkward, especially if you're jet punching down Zeroas in the early game and stifling their setup. It can be very awkward for them to draw into not only DCE Mew, but also a Field Blower on top of that. And if they have to spend Field Blowers relatively early in the game just to deal with early aggression from Buzzwoles, that gets them ahead in the prizes. Then you can end them back down, re-establish a tool on a Garbodor, and hopefully that sticks for you. And suddenly you're back in the game. You don't even need to hit like a crazy amount of elixirs all on that turn to respond on the Mew, which otherwise, in things like Buzzrock, to deal with the Mew, you pretty much have to have a crazy turn of like elixirs and stuff like that if you haven't already developed them earlier on in the game. So it gives you a decent option. And I think the archetype is strong. Again, similar to Espeon Garb, my main concern would be how heavily you tech. You are a Garbodor deck. You don't have your own inbuilt draw to help you out in the late game. I think you've got to be as consistent and simple as possible. Is always my mentality when playing a Garb list, because there's nothing worse than getting end or even ending yourself to like 4 cards and then just have nothing to do for the next few turns. There is the jank factor with these decks. It is something to be concerned with, but the inherent power level of Buzzwole is just blatant, and the inherent power level of Garbodor right now in the format is also blatant. I think the biggest hiccups would be that there are going to be Espeon Garbs running around. There's also still the fear of the Turbo Metal deck. I know we keep mentioning it, even though it's not like a top tier contender, it's not actually in our top 10 list. It's one that you have to be concerned about because it's raising a few eyebrows in recent cups and stuff like that. It's not had many regional placements just yet, but it is one to be concerned with. And the simple fact is, we're talking about a lot of the top tier decks being heavily reliant on GX Pokemon. And when you're using things like Mew and Duskmane to trade on 2-prize Pokemon, it's one of the best in the business for doing it, really. So that's why we keep seeing it on potential bad matchups for certain archetypes. But if you're looking to face things like Mill, especially if you're playing Energy Keeper Carbink alongside the break, that's never going to be a problem for you. And also you should be a little bit ahead against the Zoro variants. I do think that things do get skewed if people increase their Field Blower counts to 3, maybe even 4, like we saw originally how Tor played Zoropod. That could be, a lot more of a headache than previously, but it is something to be aware of, and I think it's not a bad play at all.
Yeah, definitely. And this is really where you can see how these 3 decks, the top 3 decks, stand out compared to the others. Like Joe said, the total placements is 50 and the total CP is over 1,000. I think on Zoroark, which I just talked about, it was around 6 and around 600, maybe even less. So you can see that these decks have really proved themselves. This top 3 has been set in stone since me and Joe started developing this video. So all 3 of these decks are incredibly strong. I think Buzzgarb in general is a little bit less aggressive, a little bit less of an aggressive Buzzwole variant, which can be good. But as Joe said, there is kind of that jank factor to playing a Garbodor variant. But Garb is really, really strong, especially when people don't respect it. It seems that people are beginning to respect it, especially with Espeon Garb doing well. But if you can catch a few matchups where people aren't playing a high Field Blower count and things like that, you can actually really, really do well with Buzzwole just because of how strong of an attacker it is. This just kind of proves that Buzzwole itself is an incredibly strong attacker, considering it's in 2 of the top 3 decks, and in general can hold its own as a solo attacker when not even paired with something like Lycanroc. Next up, we have Zoroark Golisopod. Total placements 31, total CP nearly 3,000. As we can see, this is really starting to get into high CP amounts, high placement amounts. These are the best decks in format right now, statistically, and I think sort of it's opinion-wide as well. It's another 50-50 deck. It has outs to pretty much every deck in the format. other than some of the mill archetypes. And again, we've found that one card tech that can help with those. You have matchups, you have games against pretty much every deck. You, in general, should be doing exactly what you want to be doing every turn because you're a Zoroark variant. So you can trade into your answers, which is really, really good. One of the biggest downsides is the fact that you are fighting weak, or your Zoroarks are fighting weak, and Buzzwole is an incredibly strong Pokemon, but that in general can be sort of navigated by playing Mew plus Mewtwo. I think Mew plus Mewtwo is really, really strong right now because it means that you're not bothered by ability lock if you're facing Buzzwole, but you also have multiple answers to be able to respond with, on them, which is really, really strong. It's 3 prizes to potentially take 4, plus Mew can do some pretty funky stuff with other Pokemon in the format as well. Obviously, you don't want to be facing Mill archetypes in general. This is Mill's pretty much one of his favourite matchups, just because you're running 7 energy a lot of the time. But the Oranguru can definitely help. And as we said, I don't think many people will be playing Kukui. Maybe it's out there now, maybe it's not. But if people aren't playing Kukui, resource management can get you back 6 cards, which can sometimes even just be enough to get you back into the game, to be able to close out the game and stop them from winning. So that can be really, really good. I think Zoropod has proved itself by now, doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and is still a fantastic choice for this region, international, sorry. It's the best Zoroark variant in my eyes, in both of our eyes, really. And just drawing cards is so strong. It's crazy not to consider this as a deck, and even crazier not to be testing against this, because this is going to be at least 1 or 2 of your rounds, I'd say, almost certainly.
Definitely a top contender in my eyes. Yes, Buzzwole is probably the best deck, and it's, you know, even though we say it's a 50-50 deck, it's not something you want to face a huge amount of in a tournament. It can be awkward for you. So it's all about, again, striking a balance. You want to have some, maybe even both Psychic Pokemon techs in your list. You want to have the Guru. You want to play a third Field Blur right now. There's such a wide scope in the format that you need to definitely make certain that you're covering the bases that you want to cover. Sometimes you do have to be a little bit cheeky and cut corners here and there, and I think it's going to be the players who do that the most wisely who will be the ones progressing into the tournament. So make sure you dedicate your tech slots to the right cards, but again, the word of warning will be that consistency is always the best way to go. I've been a huge fan of 4 Bridget and 2 Evo Soda. I think those, in my eyes, are still set in stone for the list, so making sure that you keep the consistency first and then play with the 2 to 3 slots that you have that are flexible, and just, again, nail on what you think are the best ones for the tournament, and that'll be the best way to go, because, you know, drawing cards is broken, the deck's broken, the points and the stats all show that. So playing something like this sounds good, and also, you know, be aware of the mirror matches, because that'll definitely be a thing. So there's still the sort of headache of how many parallels and blowers do you want to play all over again. So there's almost like 6 cards I want to throw in tech-wise, but you'll probably only have space for 2 or 3, and that's going to be the biggest and most difficult thing to manage for these Zoropod players. On to our number 1 pick, just pipping Zoropod at the post, is going to be Buzzrock. It's been tearing up tournaments. We've seen almost now pretty much every Buzzrock is playing Psychic Techs for mirror matches. That's just how popular this deck has got. People are playing Oricorio to great effect. That's our tech of choice. People have already been playing things like Mewtwo, even though it's a 2 energy attacker and you're not playing DCEs. People are just trying to get 1 less elixir to this guy to effectively get a response KO for mirrors. So play a Buzzwole Lycanroc deck that has its own Psychic Tech seems to be a decent option for you. The Oricorio even helps out against things like Espeon and stuff like that, so it feels like a no-brainer to be teching that card in my eyes. But we know how powerful Buzzrock is. It's got the nice sort of recovery of Octillery, which really does allow you to get very, very aggressive early on, be it with Jet Punching and just dealing with Zaruas, an army of lower HP Pokemon as quickly as possible, alongside Strong Energies and Regirock EX, or if you just go all out with elixirs and attachments and go swinging with even things like Absorption GX and his other main attack as well. So he can just take huge knockouts when he needs to and prioritize, you know, 1 or 2 big threats on their board, or he can do the nice spreading all around and using that Bloodthirsty Eyes to make sure you're hitting the right target every single turn. The deck's, again, very solid, pretty much set in stone for like 50 or 55 cards. We're at the point in the format where it's very mature. So pretty much everyone going to this IC is going to have a very good list. So it's going to be the one or two tech choices that really makes the difference between making day two and not, in my eyes. That's pretty much where we're at right now, alongside having that bit of luck here or there, or just being, playing your game as best as possible. These are going to be the main determining factors for me. It actually makes the tournament very difficult in my eyes, because I think at this point almost everything's been figured out for this format at the very least, and people have had a lot of time to test for this as well. So for Buzzrock, I think we all know right now that it likes facing the dark stuff just because of typing, even though they are playing handfuls of psychic stuff on their own end. Oricorio, again, can deal with Mew EX very efficiently, so maybe even going up to as high as 4 choice band in your list could be something you can do to try and cash in on that Oricorio even more so. And also Espeon Garb, that's a headache matchup for you as well, so having the Oricorio there is going to be great for that as well. So for me, Buzzrock, as long as it's playing some element of Psychic, maybe even 2 Oricorio, is that even crazy? I don't know anymore. It has such good synergy even with Jet Punch, so it's just a really cool card for the deck. I think that's the main thing I'd be dedicating spaces for, but other than that, keep it straightforward, keep it simple, hit your elixirs, and you're all groovy.
Yeah, the deck is fantastic. You can see the amount of CP earned. That's in a less than 3-month period. It's 3,000 CP across the regions, which is crazy. It's a huge amount of CP. As we've said, it likes the fighting variants. Mew and Mewtwo are obviously huge issues for it, but in general, as we've said, Oricorio is a huge sort of solution to those. It's really, really big. I think that was one of the most impactful things to this quarter, that the Oricorio in the Buzzwole Lycanroc list. The deck is by far, statistically, the best deck in format, and I think in general it's just proved itself so much. You have to respect this archetype. You have to expect to play against it at least probably 2 or 3 times during the day or during day one, and you have to know what you're doing against it. So yeah, this is theoretically the deck to beat, and maybe even the deck to play. However, if you want to take a dip outside of the top 10, we do have some sort of lesser seen archetypes for you as well. Duskmane Necrozma is obviously what we've talked about, as we've said throughout the video. Theoretically, it does really, really well against hitting 210, hitting 220 even, which is a really good number right now because it means you hit a lot of these stage ones for knockout, which is huge. So definitely that with the inherent power level or sort of over the curve power level of Solgaleo Prism Star, you definitely have a really, really strong archetype. Hooper Mill, or Attacking Hooper, is another Mill archetype that didn't have the results that Sylveon had, so didn't make it into the top 10, but is still definitely one to respect. If people aren't respecting it, people aren't playing ways to deal with Hooper, you can just lock them out of the game or force them to have to do 10 with a random basics that they're playing just to try and knock out Hoopers, and you're just going to win the game. So if people aren't respecting Hooper, it could definitely be a really, really good call. Persimmon. Persimmon obviously hits two Pokemon in the format for weakness. Persimmon hits Zoroark and Mew hits Buzzwole, and that's really good because you're hitting the 2 most popular Pokemon for weakness on non-EX attackers. Theoretically, you should be doing a lot of uptrades. The deck is kind of janky. It has some really, really weird draws sometimes. Me and Joe have both played it for about an hour on stream at the same time, and I think we both came out of that stream with more questions than we had answers. But the deck's been seeing a little bit more play, a little bit more respect, and it's definitely a fun one to try out. Ninja is obviously always has potential. When the deck gets set up, it wins. Shadow Stitching is insanely strong attack. One-sided ability lock on a non-EX with sniping is crazy good. But you are a stage 3 deck. And this is the only, other than things like Bulu and Espeon Guard, not Espeon Guardi, Zoro Guardi, sorry. This is the only other stage 2 deck in this video. And that's because in general the format is stage 1 heavy right now, just because they're more consistent. If you want to roll the dice and take the risk, Greninja's never going to be a dire play if you get set up, but you just have to pray that you're going to be able to get set up. So you're just always running that line really. Zoro Weavile saw a huge amount of success in the early stages of this format. In general, I think it's kind of succumbed to how strong Buzzwole is right now, especially as Buzzwole can one-shot a lot of your non-EX attackers with a single strong energy, which is crazy. It means that it's a lot less. It's a lot more awkward for you to be able to trade up on them. But you could even be running some psychic stuff of your own to try and swing that matchup back in your favor. And you could try and take advantage of all of the other Zoroarks out there and use their abilities against them. And finally, Glaceon Zoroark is another one that's seen some success in the past few months. Freezing Gaze is obviously a hugely strong ability. In the early turns, you can get it set up turn 1 and really push your opponent out of the game in the early turns. If not, you can just stop their trade, hinder them later on. It's just in general a really, really strong ability. I think the best way of playing Glaceon is indeed with Zoroark, just because you're able to draw cards. But with that, you're also not playing quad Glaceon, meaning that your opponent will have ways around your ability lock, which is awkward. So there's inherent flaws and strengths, but I think this is another cheeky Zoroark variant that has seen play in the past few months that could still see success this tournament, just because Freezing Gaze can shut out Zoroark players from the very early turns.
Yeah, as we've said, basically throughout the video, there's a wide format right now. There are the top 3 decks that are definitely way out in front, but then from there, pretty much everything else is on a relatively close level for what is probably reasonable to play. I think from this slide, ironically, I actually think Persimmon may be the one with the best shot at doing quite well, because if you just take a lazy man's view, basically our top 6 decks, I think, all are weak to either fighting or psychic in huge elements. So I think if you're just going to be lazy, you can go for something like Persimmon Mew. And even if you play like a catcher build and just flip some coins and hit the right stuff in the right places, you know, just hitting heads on those will win you games like a large portion of the time. So maybe a greedy Persimmon list could squeeze in and be a great play if you face enough of the top decks and ignore the fact that there are also going to be people playing the tier 2 stuff and below. Ignore that fact, hit the things for weakness, and you're going to win the tournament. Easy peasy in my book.
8 of the 10, I've just looked at the list, 8 of the 10 top 10 are either weak to fighting or psychic, so
there you go.
Let's go for it. Let's see Persimmon win. I see. That's how I see.
Well, there you go, guys. That's our view. I think our honest view, for me, I think Zoropod is simply the best deck you could be playing. I also think a Buzzwole variant with 1 or 2 Oricorios, or at least Oricorio plus Stretcher, is probably the way to go. But Persimmon feels like a hilarious build that could also go far in the tournament. That's the way I'm looking at it right now. I think Orangaru's a good tech if you're playing Zoroark, and 3 Field Blower may be mandatory for the tournament. But from there, I think the field is open and wide enough to do anything. What are you thinking, Jack? What would you be taking to this tournament?
I think I would be very surprised not to see a lot of Buzzwole and a lot of Zoroark in and around the top tables. So I think you have to either play them or be able to play against them, which we've been saying all the way through. I think Garb is definitely got potential, but it's got the clunk element to it. I think again Zorogadi is still in a fine position if you can get around the inherent inconsistencies. But I think if I was going, I'd be looking at taking a fighting variant with thoughts on being able to deal with other fighting variants. As we've said, double Oricorio could be the answer, but just making sure you have one and having a consistent list is still completely fine. So I think personally I'd be taking some kind of fighting variant, either Buzzwole or Lucario or something like that, just to be able to try and deal with the Zoroarks, as well as have a contingency plan against the other fighting stuff.
In any case, it's going to be really interesting to watch. It is being live streamed, I believe, so definitely try and tune in for that. That will be awesome, and it's going to be a great send-off for this format, leading us into Forbidden Light. That's where our attention will be turning after this video as well, so do stay tuned for all those things. As always, get involved in the discussion down below. What are you going to be playing? What would you have played if you could have attended? What do you think is going to win? We want to hear it all down below. Can Tord do it again as well? Simple yes or no answer will suffice down below. And that'll do, guys. That'll do. See you in another video soon. Thanks for watching, and yeah, laters.